Hi, welcome to Navigate STL Schools, a podcast. My name is Anastasia Allen. I'm the executive director of Navigate STL Schools, and we are sitting here today with Sharon Spurlock. Sharon, you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure. My name's Sharon Spurlock. I'm the Senior Director of Family Support at the St. Louis ARC, which is an organization that provides support to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities throughout their lifespan and their families. So I help families to navigate schools and everything else in their lives.
So, we start this interview off with everybody asking the exact same question. What is your personal K 12 education story?
No one has ever asked me that before. When I saw that question, I thought, "Oh my gosh, what is it I'm going to say?" And you know where I went? Between the ages of 8 and 13, I moved every year to a different state. And so I really think my K through 12 experience was really shaped by constantly having to start over. And I think I always had good academic skills, so that was never really a problem, even though, there were changes in curriculum when I moved. But being able to get in and make new friends and understand the way it worked in that school and build all those connections, that was really hard for me. And I think it really impacted the way I approach people in terms of trying to fit in. So I had to really work against that as I got older and really wanted to kind of figure out who I was. But that's what I thought about when you asked me.
Okay, so how has that experience played a role in the work that you do today?
Well, I think that I do want to make sure that everybody has their place wherever they land. Bloom where you're planted. And for people with disabilities, that isn't an easy thing to do all the time. A lot of resources aren't available, or people just have prejudices about whether or not someone with a disability can be part of their daycare center, part of their kindergarten class, all the way up through. I'm working with students in college now, and having college students with cognitive disabilities on campus is a really new kind of a phenomenon.
So, what keeps you motivated to do the type of work that you're doing?
Oh gosh, I love what I do. And I think part of it is there's a tremendous amount of variety, so I can bounce around between different tasks. But the real motivator is how much I enjoy building relationships with people. Because we're a lifetime service provider, there are young adults now that are turning 30 this year. Oh gosh, that says something about my age, that I met when they were 6 in our child care center. And so I've been able to really see the trajectory of their life across this, many, many different experiences and decisions and things like that. And our field is a pretty new field for civil rights. I don't think people always think about disability when they think about equity, but I really, in the last few years, really even feel like there is a stronger level of advocacy from people with disabilities and their families, and that is really exciting to me.
Random aside, I recently watched a documentary called Crip Camp.
Isn't
And
it
it was
awesome?
so awesome. And it was really about individuals with disabilities having this space where they could come together and figure out how to advocate themselves, which really led to things like the ADA and other things being passed. And I think that what they were able to do was really to humanize individuals with disabilities and to help the nation start to care about those rights, because just because you're able-bodied today doesn't mean you're going to be able-bodied tomorrow. And all of these advancements really improved the workplace for a lot of other individuals.
Yeah, most supports that people with disabilities need, there's a lot of other people that benefit from them as well. And
Mhm.
that's something I've really learned over time. So I always feel really great being a part of that advocacy.
And speaking of like advocacy and like the misconceptions that are happening around individuals with disability, you mentioned a little bit about what STL ARC does, but like what types of support do you provide for families? How do you work with them in general?
Well, we break our services for families into 3 areas. One is education, because we really don't think that families can make a choice for their younger children or help their older children make a choice unless they know what's out there. So in that, we have so much in
Mhm.
common, because that's exactly what you're doing, is providing that information. So lots and lots of information about things across all life domains. So education, employment, housing, safety and security, health, you name it. We are giving giving content to families, but also building education for advocacy, making sure people have the skills to be able to speak up for themselves and build confidence in that area. We also know families need to have connection with other people that have a similar life experience. So we do a lot of family support groups and build peer opportunities, which to me, that's so much of what happened in Crip Camp, is that you had all these people with disabilities that were able to support and learn from each other. And we all seek that out. So family support, connections is a big piece. And then the basics of information and referral and connecting people to resources. So we take almost 4,000 phone calls a year, everything from where can I get free diapers to I'm homeless on the street with my two 12-year-old kids with autism, and what can I do? And so we'll field those phone calls, and if families need it, we'll help them to connect with services to the point of being able to offer one-to-one navigation, where a family meets with us. And this morning I filled out an online form for Job Corps for a mom in the city because she didn't have a computer, and that was the next step for her. It was actually grandma, next step for her grandson.
Awesome. So you talked a lot about like the family support, and we know that there can be a lot of stigma and loneliness when families have children with that are otherly abled or have intellectual disabilities. What are some of the ways that you are able to support the entire family as they go through the process?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's all those things I mentioned, but I'll give you some examples. So one thing we offer is respite services, which doesn't on the surface seem like it's that thing to allay loneliness, but respite is a chance for a family to take a break from caregiving. And when you have a family member with a disability, typically that occurs for a longer period of time than normal babysitting services might. And it can be more intense to parent a child with a disability. So we provide funding for parents to pay somebody to come into their home. It can be another family member, a neighbor, somebody trusted to them, so they can go out and take a break. And that allows them to stay connected to their social network. So we think that's really, really important. And then with our support groups, we encourage people to exchange phone numbers. We just started helping set up play dates for families so that we can help the families that live geographically in similar areas connect. So, all those things kind of play together. I think it's just important for us to realize that that's a piece of what we want to do every time we engage with a family, is help them find that connection.
So we get a lot of calls. We work in the education field, and we always have families. What's the difference between an IEP and a 504? And what do I need to do for my child, and this and that? How do you help families understand these different terminologies that go into the actual education portion of having a child with special needs?
Well, I'm going to first have a disclaimer because I've spent my whole career working with adults. So I am not as well versed as I should be in IEP language and all the laws around that. But I have an entire team of staff that are trained on how to understand the law as it applies to education. And so that's where navigation comes in. In the simplest terms, a 504 is really just basic modifications that somebody might need to their environment. So it says that they can have some extra time for test, or maybe they need to sit in the front of a classroom. An IEP is going to be something that's going to be a mandated document that requires them to do specific services that are going to improve that child's ability to learn. So it may be a modified curriculum. It may be that there's therapies that are included in that, but it's a much more intensive support service for families.
Okay, so for some families that is scary. Like, that's a lot of stigma. I don't want my child to be labeled and things like that. Are there benefits to having this type of documentation or mandated support?
Oh, wow. I say absolutely yes, because everybody needs different kinds of things to be successful. And really, the IEP is designed to lay out success for your child. So if they need speech therapy so that their communication skills are good enough to be able to do what they want to do in the next piece of their life, if they need to have a more simplified curriculum, those are things that are going to help them be successful. And I think one of the things that is really important to us, and I didn't really talk about this earlier, but when we're working with families, IEP advocacy is a huge component. And so that comes in a couple different forms. We can sit in an IEP meeting with you, because there's nothing more daunting than sitting down at the table with a dozen professionals who are there to tell you what's wrong with your child. So we can go with you, we can write notes, we can help navigate the lingo so that it's not confusing. But we also work with families using some really family friendly tools to plan before they walk in the door. So if they want to advocate for their kid to be on the typical school bus and not get picked up by special transportation, they can walk in and say, here's my goals for my child. I want them to be able to play with the kids in our neighborhood. And if they don't ride the bus with them, that might not work for them. So we really need to work towards this. And then it sets that common goal. Once the teaching staff understand that family's vision for where they want to go, I think it helps to move them forward with academic supports, but also those other supplemental supports.
Wow. So you mentioned that you work a lot with adults. So seemingly these would be individuals that have been through some sort of system in the city of St. Louis. What do you think is one of the greatest challenges when it comes to educating a special needs child in the city?
Oh, I think it's really challenging because of coordination, for one thing. I think it's really hard, and I'm so grateful for Navigate, because it's really hard to know whether the school that's closest to your house, how well are they going to be able to support your child's individual needs. So I think that some of the things that are problematic across the school system are just more intensified for families with students that have disabilities. Staffing. The staffing crisis impacts us because teachers don't want to have a kid that is extra work in the classroom if they're already working short staff. We had families in the city this year that there was no bus service, and their kids couldn't get to school any other way. And so trying to figure out how to manage those things. And then I think in general, teachers, and we've done this to ourselves to a certain extent, we've created this space where we've have an entire field of special education, which says to people, you have to be specially trained to support this child. And I think we're making some changes in that now, but teaching all teachers going through a universal learning so that they know how to support kids with all kinds of different learning styles and all kinds of abilities, I think is ultimately going to make some changes, because I do think teachers don't want to fail. I think there's a lot of pressure for them to turn in good test scores, to have students be successful, and so they often don't want those kids in their classroom.
You actually brought up a really good point with all of the different learning environments and different learning styles that individuals might have. How does a parent know when it's time to advocate? What signs or things should they be looking for where maybe it's ADHD, maybe it's normal 5-year-old behavior and they just need a couple of adjustments? So what's some advice that you can give to parents who just really don't know, but they know that they need additional support?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is another one that's tough for me, and I would encourage you to talk to our early childhood team. But there are certainly indicators, growth indicators of where your child should be at different points. Just because your kid's underneath those doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem, but those are potential for a reason why you might want to seek out an evaluation. I think having some ability to see your kid in an environment with other kids the same age gives you a chance to kind of evaluate them against their peers, which lets you know how are they doing. I think with COVID so much, we've spent time alone, and so it's really hard for you to know, how does my child interact with other 3-year-olds, with other 4-year-olds. So I think that's really helpful. And then in the end, I think any time that you are questioning, it's a great time to reach out, because because there's a lot of opportunities for very young children not to be labeled with a developmental disability, but to be identified with some delays where they can get services without a diagnosis. And so those speech services, those OT and PT services, a little bit of extra education might really just help your kid get back up to grade level. So I think it's never hurts to ask. And really, I encourage families as well to go with their gut, because I can't tell you how many families I talk to that say, I just knew something was wrong. And the teachers told me that that was just their age. And the doctor told me they'd grow out of it. But I just knew something wasn't right. And then they eventually got this diagnosis. So I think we have to trust people too. And if you feel like something's not right, keep seeking out resources to help you kind of figure out what it is that's going on.
Oh my God, that's excellent, because it really brings me to my next question, which is, how do you help parents understand when to advocate and how to advocate for their children to get the results that they need? Because a lot of times parents are surrounded by experts in education or special needs or physical assistance and da 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 da, and they aren't really honored as experts in their child, and so maybe their concerns are dismissed or not being heard correctly because of how they're being delivered. So like, what support do you have for families who want to learn how to advocate for their children?
Really, I think sitting down and having that opportunity to think ahead is really important, because the meeting itself, any meeting with a teacher, going to a parent teacher conference is stressful. But if you're going into an IEP that's really formal, that can be an hour and a half, 2 hours long with all these people. So we are there to help families plan. So you may have an idea of what you want first grade to look like for your child, or you may have an idea of where you want your kid to be when they leave middle school. It can be as far out or as close in as you want, but being able to lay out not only what you want, but what you don't want can allow you to stay there when you're having conversations with professionals. And if you can all agree on that future vision, then the steps to get there, that conversation becomes less confrontational and more about figuring out the best path. And I think a lot of times that best path is about understanding that family and that family's environment that they live in and the things that kind of impact them. So we're there for all of that. But I do, when I talk to teachers, they say, oh, it was so helpful to have the family come in with this picture in mind and let us know who was already cheerleading for this kiddo, and what they felt their strengths and their talents were. So that's one of the things we spend a lot of time talking to families, like, what is your child's gift? What are they really good at? Because that's a really beautiful way to start a meeting, rather than coming in and talking about how far behind they are in reading, or other things that are going wrong, to be able to say they're incredibly kind and they're able to follow a direction, and whatever it is, they know their ABCs. Those are really nice things to start the meeting and start the picture off in a positive vein.
Mm-hmm. So we spent a lot of time talking about intellectual or developmental disabilities. How do you guys support families who have students with physical disabilities, wheelchairs, or other assisting devices and things like that?
Um, well, for young children, we have a program called Capable Kids and Families, where we do in-home family visitation. And as part of that visitation, we're able to provide free equipment, partially because kids grow all the time. And so most of the time for that kind of equipment, they're going to grow out of it. And we don't want you to spend money on something that's not going to be a long-term benefit to you, because typically resources are very limited. And we aren't the therapists. We work with an existing therapy team that already is working with the child. So our job is really to come in and talk to mom and dad, see how things are going, and then also leave this equipment with them. We don't work a lot with durable medical equipment, but we know who does. So the other thing we can do is refer you to other organizations that are going to be able to help.
And when and how can a family get connected to STL ARC?
Any family can get connected to us at any time if they call our main line, which is 314-569-2211, and ask for somebody in family support. We can connect you with our services. What we'll try and do is get a picture of the whole family, what's going on, what are your priorities, and then help figure out what you might be eligible for. So all of our family support services are free, and we've had people come into a Zoom meeting from California. So you can come from anywhere and participate. You can go on our YouTube site and watch any of our videos. For programs that like the Respite or the Capable Kids and Families program, that's eligibility is based on where you live and age and some other factors. So we'll be able to sort all that out. But the nice thing is that we're not really focused on you getting all your services from the ARC. We want you to get the services that you need. So we do refer to other agencies and try and look at that whole picture. You know, the woman I was talking with today, in addition to the stuff for her grandson, was having some utility issues. So we talked about that, which wasn't directly related to her grandson, but if the utilities get cut off at the house, it sure is. Mm-hmm. So we try to really be holistic in our approach.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about concerns, we've talked a lot about stigma. What really gives you hope for the quality of education for students with special needs as we move forward or in the region?
Well, a couple things. One, I really do think that the trend of colleges teaching universal learning techniques is going to have an impact for our kiddos, because I think more teachers are going to feel comfortable. I think we're being smarter about how we deploy resources. One of the programs I didn't talk about that I think is a model we want to expand is our embedded early learning supports model, where we come in as consultants to early childhood programs, so that if they're working with kiddos of all abilities and there's a couple kids that they're struggling with, we can work directly with the teachers and the child care staff to kind of help them understand the best supports, bring in resources, provide visual aids, all those kinds of things. So I think we're being smart about those kinds of supports too, so that we can bring supports in where they're needed in just smaller amounts instead of pulling kids out to a segregated space. But mostly what I am excited about is the change in confidence and advocacy for students and for parents. One of the people on our board is a former St. Louis City public school student who has a disability, and his stories about finally being let into his own meeting to talk about his education and his future, it's really impactful when you hear from the person. And I think anytime you're in a civil rights situation, you want the person who's disenfranchised to be able to speak up for themselves. So the more advocates we have that are speaking up, that are mentoring other young people, that are getting into schools and talking to teachers and other professionals and their parents, having those same skills, I think it's going to keep getting better and better.
So, I'm struggling with the correct way to word this question. Oftentimes I've been talking to you a lot about parents who have children with special needs. How do you support families or caregivers that might be the ones who have special needs or intellectual disabilities, that they need support to make sure that their voice is heard for advocating for their potentially mainstream child?
Thank you. Thanks for asking that, because we have a really cutting edge program that has been around for over 25 years now, Parents Learning Together, where we do work with parents who themselves have an intellectual or developmental disability to meet 6 specific criteria of parenting and being successful parents, which includes that ability to advocate with the school system and provide those supports. So we'll go into a family home and set up individual goals to help them be successful. We'll go to school meetings with them. And then we also bring them together for peer support, because we know they can learn from each other and get what they need. We're at the Divine. And so that program right now is in St. Louis City. We'd like to expand it, so we're hopeful to be able to do more than that. But we have people with disabilities that are parents in all of our family support services in our Capable Kids and Families program. So you don't have to be in a parenting program to get that support.
Awesome. And my last question for you is, what advice do you have for parents in the city in particular that are contemplating, can my child get a good education as a child with intellectual disability in the St. Louis City school system, or should they move to the county for special school district?
Oh boy. I guess what I always tell families is ultimately you know what's best. So I think that's the bottom line. However, I think you need to know you're not alone. And anytime I make a really good decision, it's rarely all by myself. So I think it's making those connections with Navigate STL schools, making connections with St. Louis Art, talking to other parents and finding out whether they had a good experience or not, because there's many, many good schools in the city that are providing a great education. And there's benefits in all environments, and there's pros and cons, so you need to know those and then make what's the best decision for your kiddo. For your family, it may be most important that they're right there in their neighborhood school, getting connected to all the other kids. Or it may be that there's another program somewhere that is going to really better meet their interest or intellectual needs. So I'm not the one to answer the question, but I sure want to walk the path with you. So call us.
Awesome. And just for general purposes, where can people find you? What is your website? What's your social media?
Our website is www.slarc.org, and you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Just Google St. Louis Arc, and you will find us. We do have 100 plus videos on our YouTube site that are divided by age and by different parts of your life so that you can kind of sort them really easily. And call us. Again, our number is 314-569-2211. We spend all day long talking to folks, and we love it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks for giving me this space.
Awesome.